It started with a knock on the door. Rachel answered it, thinking it was a delivery or a friend. But instead, she was greeted by a group of people in white robes. Before she could even react, they pushed their way inside and overpowered her. Rachel woke up in a dimly lit room, surrounded by the same cult members who had abducted her. She was tied to a chair, unable to move, and completely at their mercy. They began to chant, and Rachel realized with horror that they were performing some kind of ritual. Days turned into weeks as Rachel was subjected to more and more of the cult's twisted practices. She saw things she couldn't explain, and her mind began to fray under the constant stress and terror. She was certain that she would never make it out of there alive. But then, one night, Rachel was able to break free from her restraints and make a run for it. She raced through the cult's compound, dodging robed figures as they tried to grab her. She finally made it to the gate and pushed it open, only to be greeted by an even more terrifying sight. The cult had taken over the entire town. They had brainwashed the residents and were using them to do their bidding. Rachel saw people she had known her whole life, now transformed into mindless cult members. She realized that this wasn't just a small group of crazies. It was a full-blown cult that had taken over her entire community. Rachel knew that she had to do something to stop them. She began to gather a group of survivors who had managed to avoid the cult's influence. Together, they formulated a plan to take back their town and put an end to the cult's reign of terror. It wasn't an easy battle, and many lives were lost, but eventually, Rachel and her group were able to overpower the cult and drive them out of the town. They destroyed the cult's headquarters and freed those who had been brainwashed. Rachel felt a sense of relief and satisfaction, knowing that she had played a part in bringing an end to such a heinous organization. But the trauma and horror of her experience with the cult would never fully leave Rachel. She would always have nightmares and flashbacks of those dark days, and she would always be haunted by the thought that there could be other cults out there, just waiting to do the same thing. It was just an ordinary night for Jane. She went to bed early, exhausted from a long day at work. But little did she know that this would be the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt her for the rest of her life. In the middle of the night, Jane woke up to find herself standing in front of her bedroom window, staring out into the darkness. She had no memory of getting out of bed or walking across the room. She assumed it was just a strange episode of sleepwalking and tried to go back to bed, but this became a regular occurrence. Every night, Jane would wake up in different parts of her house with no memory of how she got there. It was as if she was being controlled by some unseen force. One night, Jane woke up to find herself standing in front of her bathroom mirror, but this time she wasn't alone. There was a figure behind her, reflected in the mirror. It was a tall, shadowy figure with glowing eyes. Jane tried to turn around, but her body wouldn't respond. The figure spoke to her in a low, raspy voice. "I've been waiting for you," it said. "You're mine now." Jane tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure reached out and touched her, and she felt a cold, prickly sensation all over her body. Then, everything went black. When Jane woke up the next morning, she was in her bed, but she felt different. It was as if something had taken over her body. She had the urge to do things that she knew were wrong, like hurt people or destroy things. She fought against it, but it was like trying to resist a tidal wave. She decided to seek help and went to see a psychiatrist. After several sessions, the psychiatrist concluded that Jane was suffering from a rare form of parasomnia, a sleep disorder that caused her to act out her dreams while asleep. But Jane knew deep down that it was more than that. One night, as she was sleepwalking again, she followed the figure from the bathroom mirror to the basement. There, she discovered a hidden room filled with strange symbols and a small altar. It was then that she realized that she had been possessed by a demon, summoned by a previous owner of the house who dabbled in dark magic. Jane knew she had to exorcise the demon, but she didn't know how. She went back to the psychiatrist who referred her to a priest. The priest performed a ritual, and Jane felt the demon leave her body. She thought it was over, but the nightmare had only just begun. The demon was still in the house, and it wanted revenge. It started to haunt her, appearing in mirrors and shadows, and whispering dark thoughts into her mind. In the end, Jane decided to sell the house and move away. She didn't want to risk the demon coming back, but even now, years later, she can still feel its presence, lurking in the darkness, waiting for its next victim. The possession game. Maggie had always been fascinated by the paranormal. She spent hours reading books about ghosts, demons, and other supernatural creatures, and loved watching horror movies. So when her friend Sarah suggested they play a game that could supposedly summon a demon, Maggie was eager to try it out. The game involved drawing a circle on the floor with various symbols and lighting candles around it. Then each person would take turns reciting a chant, supposedly inviting a demon to possess them. The catch was that the only way to end the game was to exorcise the demon from everyone who had been possessed. Maggie and Sarah convinced two more of their friends, Mike and Alex, to join in the game. They gathered in Maggie's basement, which was decorated with various spooky items she had collected over the years. They followed the instructions for the game, each taking turns reciting the chant. Nothing seemed to happen at first, but then Mike suddenly collapsed to the floor, convulsing and foaming at the mouth. The others tried to help him, but he suddenly stopped moving and his eyes turned pitch black. The others were terrified and tried to run, but the doors to the basement were suddenly locked, trapping them inside. One by one, they were possessed by the demon, which seemed to be getting stronger with each new host. Maggie realized they had made a terrible mistake and begged the demon to leave them alone, but it was too late. The demon had taken control of them all, and they were no longer in control of their own bodies. The demon forced them to do terrible things, such as vandalizing property, hurting innocent people, and even killing a stray dog. The possessed friends couldn't resist the demon's will, and their bodies were slowly being destroyed by the demonic possession. As the days passed, the demon grew stronger and more powerful. It was clear that they couldn't exorcise it on their own, and they needed outside help. Maggie's parents came home from vacation and found their daughter and her friends in a terrible state. They called a local priest, who performed an exorcism on each of them. The process was painful and terrifying, but eventually, the demon was banished from their bodies. The friends were traumatized by the experience, and they vowed never to dabble in the supernatural again. They realized that summoning demons was not a game, and that the consequences could be deadly. In the end, they were lucky to have survived the possession game. They knew that they would always be haunted by the memory of the demon they had unleashed, and they could never be sure that it wouldn't return someday.